The estate that was once my forefather's shall be my son's, and his son's after him." As I listened, my whole soul rose against him in bitter hatred, the old hatred of my youth. "I defy you," I cried hotly, "to produce one atom of proof in support of your claim or your charges against me. The estate is mine, and I will make you rue the day that you dare dispute my right and title to it." His eyes flashed with scorn as he replied, "You lie, Hugh Mainwaring. Your life for the past 25 years has been nothing but a lie, and the day just closed has witnessed the final act in this farce of yours. That I have already undone, and just as surely I will undo the work of the past years. And let me assure you, I have no lack of proof with which to verify either my own claim or the assertion I have made, or may yet make, against you. I have proof that on the night preceding my father's death he made a will restoring me to my full rights, which you have fraudulently withheld all these years, and through my son, whom you have known for the past 18 months as your private secretary, I have proof that that will is still in existence, of itself an irrefutable witness against you." With the mention of my secretary the truth flashed upon me. I realized I was completely in his power, and with a sense of my own impotency my rage and hatred increased. Forgetful of the weapon in his hand and almost blind with fury, I sprang towards him, intending to throttle him, to strangle him, until he should plead for mercy. Instantly he raised the revolver in warning, but not before I had seized his wrist, turning the weapon from myself. A brief struggle followed, in which I soon found my strength was no match for his. Growing desperate, I summoned all my strength for one tremendous effort, at the same time holding his wrist in a vice-like grip, forcing his hand higher, and turning the revolver more and more in his direction. Suddenly there was a flash, a sharp report, and he fell heavily to the floor, dragging me down upon him. For an instant I was too much stunned and bewildered to realize what had happened, but a glance at my opponent revealed the situation. He lay motionless where he had fallen, and a ghastly wound over the right eye told the terrible story. Dazed with horror, I placed my hand over his heart, but there was no motion, no life. He was dead. The awful truth forced itself upon me. Mad and blind with rage, I had turned the weapon upon him, and it had discharged, whether by some sudden movement of his hand or by the accidental pressure of my own fingers upon the trigger. God alone knows. I do not. One fact I could not then, nor ever can, forget. It was my hand that gave the weapon its deadly aim, however blindly or unwittingly, and the blood of my brother, whom I had wronged and defrauded, now lay at my door. The agony of remorse that followed was something beyond description, beyond any suffering of which I had ever dreamed. But suddenly a thought flashed upon me which added new horror, causing me to spring to my feet, cold with terror, while great beads of perspiration gathered on my brow. When that terrible scene should be revealed, not alone in the approaching morning light, but in the light of past events which, if the last words spoken by those lips, now sealed in death, were true, could no longer be kept secret, what would be the world's verdict? Murder, fratricide, and I, great God, of what avail would be any plea of mine in the face of such damning evidence? I rushed to the tower room and hastily opened my safe, took from a private drawer therein a key, and with trembling fingers fitted it into the lock of a large metallic box which contained the family jewels, and which for more than 25 years had held the old will executed by my father on his deathbed. I had seen it there less than 48 hours before, and in my desperation I now determined to destroy it. My very haste and eagerness delayed me, but at last the cover flew back, revealing the gleaming jewels, but the will was not there. Unable to believe my own eyes, I drew my fingers carefully back and forth through the narrow receptacle where it had lain, and among the satin linings of the various compartments, but in vain. The will was gone. My brother had spoken the truth, and the will was doubtless in the possession of his son, who, under its terms, was now himself heir to the estate. The room grew dim, and the walls themselves seemed to whirl swiftly about me, as, with great difficulty, I groped my way back to the library, where I stood gazing at that strange counterpart of myself, till, under the growing horror of the situation, it seemed to my benumbed senses as though I were some disembodied spirit hovering above his own corpse. The horrible illusion was like a nightmare. I could not throw it off, and I would then and there have gone stark, staring mad, but that there came to me out of that awful chaos of fancies a suggestion which seemed like an inspiration. "It is Hugh Mainwaring," I said to myself. "Hugh Mainwaring died tonight." My fevered brain grew cool, my pulse steady, and my nerves firm, as I proceeded at once to act upon the idea. Kneeling beside the dead man, I examined the wound. The bullet had entered above the right eye and passed downward, coming out at the base of the brain. From both wounds the blood was flowing in a slow, sluggish stream. Drawing a large handkerchief from my pocket, I bound it tightly about the head over both wounds, knotting it firmly. Then, carrying the body into the tower room, I made sure that all doors were locked, and proceeded to put into execution the plan so suddenly formed. By this time I was myself, and though the task before me was neither easy nor pleasant to perform, I went about it as calmly and methodically as though it were some ordinary business transaction. As expeditiously as possible I removed the dead man's clothing and my own, which I then exchanged, dressing the lifeless form in the clothes I had worn on the preceding day, even to the dressing gown which I had put on upon retiring to my apartments, while I donned his somewhat travel-worn suit of tweed. Having completed this gruesome task, I left the body in much the same position in which it had originally fallen, lying slightly upon the right side, the right arm extended on the floor, and to give the appearance of suicide, I placed my own revolver, first emptying one of the chambers, near his right hand. On going to my desk for the revolver, I discovered the explanation of my brother's words when he said that he had already undone my work of the preceding day, the final act of the farce I had carried out. In the terrible excitement of those moments, his meaning escaped my mind. Now it was clear. My own will, executed with such care, and which early in the evening I had left upon my desk, was gone. That he had destroyed it in his wrath and scorn, I had abundant proof a little later, upon incidentally finding in the small grate in that room the partially burned fragments of the document, which I left to tell their own tale. Having satisfactorily disposed of Hugh Mainwaring, as the dead man now seemed to my overwrought imagination, I made preparation for my immediate departure. This occupied little time. There was fortunately some cash in the safe, which I took. All drafts and papers of that nature I left. They were of value only to Hugh Mainwaring, and he was dead. As the cash would be inadequate, however, for my needs, I decided after considerable deliberation to take the family jewels, though not without apprehension that they might lead to my detection, as they finally did. These I put in a small box covered with ordinary wrapping paper to attract as little attention as possible, and having completed my preparations, I removed the bandage from the dead man's head and threw it with the private keys to my library into the metallic box which had held the jewels. Then donning the black wig and mustache which my visitor had thrown aside on disclosing his identity, together with a long ulster which he had left in the tower room, I took one farewell look at the familiar apartments and their silent occupant, and stole noiselessly out into the night. I remained on the premises only long enough to visit the small lake in the rear of the house, into which I threw the metallic box and its contents. Then, following the walk through the grove to the side street, I left Fair Oaks, as I well knew, forever. While yet on the grounds I met my own coachman, but he failed to recognize me in my disguise. My plans were already formed. I had come to the conclusion that my late visitor and the caller of the preceding afternoon, whose card bore the name of J. Henry Carruthers, were one and the same. My secretary had stated that Carruthers had come out from the city that day, so my appearance at the depot, dressed in his own disguise, would probably attract no attention. I was fortunate enough to reach the depot just as two trains were about to pull out. The suburban train which would leave in 3 minutes for the city, and the northbound express, due to leave 5 minutes later. I bought a ticket for New York, then passing around the rear of the suburban train, quietly boarded the express, and before the discovery of that night's fearful tragedy, I was speeding towards the great West. But go where I might, from that hour to this, I have never been free from agonizing remorse, nor have I been able for one moment to banish from my memory the sight of that face, the face of my brother, killed by my own hand, and a discovery which I made within the first few hours of my flight made my remorse 10 times deeper. In going through the pockets of the suit I wore, I found a letter from my brother, addressed to his son, written in my own library and at my own desk while he awaited my coming. He seemed to have had a sort of presentiment that his interview with me might end in some such tragedy as it did, and took that opportunity to inform his son regarding both his past work and his plans for the future. What was my astonishment to find that his son was, at that time, as totally unaware of his father's existence as I was a few hours before of the existence of a brother. From this letter I learned that the son had been given away at birth, and was to know nothing of his true parentage until he had reached years of maturity, that he himself had been shipwrecked as reported years ago, but had